1981, two hunters located some bones, and they thought these were potentially human remains.
The remains had been there for at least a couple of years.
So the question is, who is this individual?
We had no DNA. Fingerprints were out because of the condition of the remains.
Technology at that point in time was very, very limited. Investigators, their MO is going to be just shake the bushes, talk to as many people as you can talk to.
Eventually, this case goes cold. We were able to develop a profile.
It was placed into CODIS to see if we could get a positive hit.
That last conversation, I realized he was telling me goodbye. And then I never spoke to him again.
I think something very malicious probably happened. It was just a strange place to find his body.
I really believe this comes down to the final moments of his life and who he was around. There are people in East Tennessee that know the answers.
On April 4th, 1981. Two local people here in the community were out hunting in an isolated area in Wallen, Tennessee, where they actually came across some bone fragments. At that point in time, they contacted the Blount County Sheriff's Office. Deputies responded, and it was determined that the remains that they had discovered were potential human remains. They were sent to the UT Forensic Center in Knoxville. An anthropologist looked at the remains that were collected.
In the early 1970s, Dr. Bass came to the University of Tennessee and offered his services as a forensic anthropologist. And he would respond to requests by law enforcement and medical examiners across the state if they had found bones. My name is Lee Meadows Jantz. I am a forensic anthropologist here at the University of Tennessee. The bones were in pretty poor condition. I'm surprised that somebody recognized them as possibly human, because they're fragmentary, they're heavily scavenged, but there was enough there to say that it was human.
Investigators went back to that location and did a more intel search of the area, where they actually did discover additional bones.
I think it was a partial cranium and two parts of long bones. There really wasn't very much. As a forensic anthropologist, we build a biological profile. We look at the skeletal remains and we estimate the age of the individual, we estimate the sex, we estimate the population affinity. Because there was so little remains, you're very limited on what you could say. It was a male, and all you could say for age is that it's an adult based on the quality and the size of the bone.
The most difficult thing there is you have a very partial skeleton. You don't have dental bones to, compare with dental records or anything like that. So the question is, who is this individual?
Where the remains were located was in Miller Cove area. There's an East and West Millers Cove here in our jurisdiction. Remote, woodland. I actually grew up in Wallen, the same area that the remains were found. In 1981, I was actually less than 2 miles away in a local middle school. I wanted to be involved with pretty much the start and the finish of this particular case.
Investigators were able to determine that the remains had been there for at least a couple of years. My name is Detective Daniel Strope. I'm with the Blount County Sheriff's Office. I do criminal investigations as well as fire and arson.
Obviously, the remains that went to the Forensic Center, medically, we asked for them to give us any type of evidentiary value that may link a cause or manner of death.
We can look at the skeletal remains and see if maybe there was some kind of a traumatic event, what might have killed this person. As a forensic anthropologist, we are not MDs, we do not determine manner of death. That is for the medical examiner. However, we can provide information about what might have happened to the individual. However, I don't think they got anything. So there's not a lot you can say about it.
Those bones were preserved and remained there at the facility in hopes that eventually we could ID that person. Obviously, we locally start looking for any missing persons, reports of that nature that our agency might have on file. Nothing at that point matched up. We expanded our search here at the Sheriff's Office just to see if there's any missing people or code cases roughly in that time frame.
Technology at that point in time, at least scientific forensic technology, was very, very limited. And investigators, their MO is going to be just shake the bushes, talk to as many people as you can talk to, seeking any help from the public to try to identify who this person might be, really without any success.
Nothing connected any reports to those remains, so eventually this case goes cold.
That doesn't mean law enforcement has forgotten about it. That doesn't mean they're not investigating it. Those cases always remain open. And anytime new information comes in, they're going to go back and review that and plug in that new information and see if that can further their investigation.
Throughout the years, along with technology and advancements, we just kept forging forward. In 2002, I became a detective investigator, and that's when I actually was able to see that particular case file. We were trying at that point just to build a profile on the person. And I remember my captain at that time, Captain Hedrick, talking about this particular case. He was the one that led the forefront of trying to develop the profile. And I remember him telling me with technology and with DNA, at some point in time, we're going to get to the stage to identify this person. The remains themselves remained at UT until further testing was done down in Texas. In 2007, we started getting somewhat of a potential standard, with technology.
Eventually, we were able to get a DNA sample from the remains.
At that time, we were able to develop a profile to actually test against.
It was placed into CODIS, which is a DNA database that is maintained nationally, and then we're trying to compare results to see if we could get a positive hit.
Unfortunately, we didn't get any hits on the profile.
Law enforcement entities at that time are seeking any help from the public to try to identify who this person might be.
The sheriff's office got calls from the community. Potential leads came in hoping to identify that person.
At the time, we also did try to track down potential family members of who we believed it could be.
We were bringing family members in, potentially we thought could be connected to this case. We did do DNA swabs on individuals. Unfortunately, those swabs turned up negative. All investigators, all detectives have hope to identify someone that's unknown, to give that person back to the family, to give them some type of information, possibly closure, if you will. But I do remember this particular case passed through many investigators.
I can just imagine the investigators before me, the frustrations that have come just from having individuals they think it could be and the hope that could come with that, and then finding out that it's not a match. So when I first got this case, we really didn't have anyone calling in. We didn't have any new information that had come up. Sometimes, unfortunately, especially in these types of investigations, it's kind of a waiting game. You really can't do anything more than what you have in front of you. You can look at all the evidence you have, look through the case files that were before you, talk to the investigator prior to you.
In 2022, Othram identified human remains found in 1985 in Elk Valley as Tracy Sue Walker. I'm Brandon Elkins, and I'm an Assistant Special Agent in charge with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. As part of my role, I oversee TBI's Cold Case and Unidentified Human Remains Initiative.
The Tracy Sue Walker case was my first encounter with FGG testing. That's really when I heard Othram's name for the first time. My name is Leslie Earhart. I am a Public Affairs Officer for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. In 2022, we approached the Governor's Office and the General Assembly about the idea of the Unidentified Human Remains Initiative and talked about the sheer number of unidentified individuals in Tennessee. We explained that all traditional means of investigation had been exhausted, essentially. The Governor's Office and the General Assembly saw the value in funding the initiative. Initially, we were given $100,000.
Through TBI's Unidentified Human Remains Initiative, we've been utilizing both state and federal funds that we've gotten through grants to be able to assist local law enforcement agencies that may not have either the experience with the technology with FGG or the funding specifically set aside to be able to look at these cases. So based on the success from the Tracy Sue Walker case, I quickly realized there was a lot of value in us trying to use forensic genetic genealogy to identify more victims in the state of Tennessee. One of those cases that was kind of quickly focused on was a case out of Blount County.
The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation came to me and said, we'd like to open an investigation into this cold case. We have resources we think can be utilized to further the investigation of this cold case. Of course, we're going to say yes.
It was March of 2025. The Blount County Sheriff's Office was contacted by Agent Elkins from TBI, and they wanted to know if we wanted to link together and work this particular case due to genealogy DNA. Obviously, we were very excited to link with TBI and go forward.
I was hopeful that we would get some kind of profile or some answers back. Of course, with all the inabilities to get answers beforehand, I was kind of cautiously optimistic. You're always hopeful that the newest technology is going to be able to provide the answers that you're wanting.
I was able to get with the investigators there at the Sheriff's Office in Blount County and talk to them a little bit about the case. We were able to find the remains. They were housed at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville at the Forensic Anthropology Center. And so I spoke with Dr. Lee Jantz. We worked together in being able to determine which remains to send and being able to find the things that would make us most successful in this. There were limited remains found, which always makes it a little more difficult with the science side of things. But we took a shot. And so we submitted those remains to Othram through our initiative and grant funding, and then began the real work. So we dropped those remains off with Othram that day, and I got to tour the facility. I got to see all the work that happens in that building. It's like a beehive. Never forget, because around Christmas at the time we went down, and there was a Christmas tree in the lobby, and on that tree was a picture of Tracy Sue Walker. I guess that was sort of a sign to me that we needed to keep pushing forward with these other cases, being able to see photos and give names instead of just having bones in a bag.
We were able to onboard the remains, and we were able to develop a DNA extract from these remains, and then use the DNA extract to build a DNA profile that we could use for forensic genetic genealogy search.
I was surprised that we could get DNA out of them. You know, the exposure to the environment and scavenging can really cause problems with DNA analysis.
Othram has built robust technology. We've worked with exploded remains. We've worked with remains that were dumped in sewage tanks for decades, remains that were floating in an ocean for 100 years. It is irrelevant because we have enough evidence in their skeleton to be able to give that victim their name back and justice.
When we looked at the DNA profile, we were able to confirm that we were looking for someone that was largely European. And when we do the forensic genetic genealogy search, we get back a number of genetic relatives, and these are people that are genetically related to the person we're looking for, and they've consented or opted in to a law enforcement search. And we don't always get one particular relative that is really close in genetic relationship to the person we're looking for, but we get a lot of relatives that are, reasonably semi-close to distant.
Genealogy is a wonderful tool for law enforcement in solving these cases, but as we all know, every family's a little different. And when you deal with a case that goes back to the 1970s, you have a lot of family that has since passed away. There's less resources to be able to touch because of that. And so the genealogists have to go out further with the lower centimorgan matches in order for us to sort of build out that family tree, find that most recent common ancestor, and try to find the person that's best suited to make that identification.
As we look to figure out where our person belongs on a family tree, we find genetic relatives on both sides of the family, several, that allow us to very quickly anchor where our unidentified person likely sits on the tree. He's essentially the union of two families, his mom's family and his dad's family. Because there were so many genetic relatives at so many generations on both sides of the family, this was a very straightforward genetic genealogy puzzle, because it really restricted the possibilities of where our person could sit on the tree. There was so many anchor points. And we identify a daughter. Sometimes you have to talk to the family members, do additional reference DNA testing. And so we call Special Agent Elkins and we send him the lead.
So once we had a possible lead on this case, we were able to find a family member that we believed had a missing person in their family they hadn't seen really since the 1970s. We asked the family member to help us out to provide DNA so that we could compare it against those original remains that were submitted. Family member agreed to help us and provided a DNA standard, a family reference standard. That standard was then sent to Othram for confirmation. And we also utilized our rapid DNA program to be able to take a look at that DNA very quickly and determine if we thought we had a match. Ultimately, through those forensic leads provided, we were able to determine this was William Thomas Green, who had been missing from his family since the 1970s.
When they found me and I did the DNA testing, I didn't believe it at first. But I'm very thankful that my DNA matched up with his and we know it was him.
It was very, very exciting to know that we actually had not only a name to go with these identified bones that had been here for many years, but we actually had a family member connected to the remains.
Captain Trent had come into my office. He said, "Hey, I've got some great news." The last thing that was on my mind was that we had an identification of William Thomas Green. Being able to identify the remains of someone that had gone missing well before I was alive is one of the coolest moments of my career.
Now we have a person with a family, a person with a history, a person with friends and associates that are still alive today, and that just opens the Pandora's box of potential evidence. Once you've identified that victim, now you've got some real teeth to an investigation. You've got some real avenues you can follow to try to further that investigation, so it's a complete game changer.
We were able to go to Knoxville and speak to other family members that were able to provide really good information on this case, and we were able to get some photographs and stuff of that nature and put a face with these remains.
When they identified these remains, they called me and told me that this was my uncle. William Thomas Green is his birth name. Everybody called him Tommy. My mom would tell me that he would defend her or his younger brother, my uncle, when they were kids growing up. I know that as he got older, he was pretty tough, pretty rough guy. Sometimes his dad and him would kind of get aggressive toward each other because he was very independent. He had his own mindset, and if you knew my grandfather, he was typically the same. I think he was like 23 when I was born. He had 2 children, Ricky and Angela, or Angie we called her. They would come around with him, when he would come to visit. But I remember him coming and playing in the yard with us. When he did, it was fun.
He was a very involved father. Him and I were very, very close. He was a baseball coach for my brother. He loved us both very much. I actually would drive around with him when he was delivering bread from the bakery.
So once we had confirmation that these remains were those of Tommy, we were able to take a look closer at his life. We know that he was from Knoxville, that he lived in this area, that he worked in this area, that he had recently been divorced.
He had a son and daughter. Unfortunately, the son had passed. The daughter, one of the comments she made was, "At least we know he just didn't leave us." She was roughly 11 years old at that time that he went missing.
My mom moved me away from Knoxville a couple of years before he went missing. I did think for a long time that he ran off to a different country. I spent years buying him Father's Day gifts. I would put him in my closet. It was hard not having my father.
She would defend her dad to this day. That's how she feels about him. Whereas later on, I understood her brother, Ricky, was upset with him. And of course, she really relied on Ricky after her dad was gone missing. Him and her got really close. They took care of each other.
It's really hard to imagine having spent your entire life not knowing why you didn't have a father. Did something bad happen to your dad? Did your dad just leave you? Now for this person to know that, my dad did not abandon me. My dad wasn't off in other parts of the country and other parts of the world living a life without me. My dad would have been in my life if he could have been in my life. But because he was deceased, they now know that he didn't abandon them.
He was loved so much by his family, by his mom especially, who really, before death, never really gave up hope in finding out what happened to Tommy.
When my grandparents passed, I was the one that cleaned out the house. And my grandmother had kept a whole briefcase full of stuff where she had written down things, people's contact information and so forth from that period of time, newspaper clippings. My grandmother had an article she'd clipped 4 years after he was missing about a person's body found, very little remains of it left, and she'd put a question mark by it thinking, hey, was this it? And it was kind of interesting that she did that because it was his. She had that desire to find him.
After we met with the family, we're starting to piecemeal things together. Now we know pretty much the last date and time that anyone saw Mr. Green.
I remember hearing my grandmother talk to my grandfather about that he was in jail, and she was worried about him going to prison. He was caught driving a stolen vehicle, and it was loaned to him by one of his friends. Now, I think they even found a few drugs in the car.
Based on court records obtained from Knox County, the adjacent county to Blount County, Mr. Green had been arrested for some minor criminal charges in early November of 1977. He was then released by the court in late November of 1977 and was given a court date of December 1977 to reappear. Mr. Green never reappeared for that December court date.
The last time I spoke with him, he called me and I said, are you gonna come and pick me up Saturday? He just said, baby girl, don't ever forget I love you. Daddy's gotta go. And when I got off the phone, my mom told me, your father was calling you from jail. And then I never spoke to him again. That last conversation, I realized he was telling me goodbye.
I remember my grandmother talking about the fact that my uncle was last seen walking along the interstate after release and probably just wanted to get away, and that was the last time anybody saw him.
We discovered that there was no police report in Knoxville that had been filed. So that was a barrier looking back now when we were trying to piece together missing people roughly from that 1981 time frame.
Family was looking for him all of this time, and they did want to know what happened. But this person wasn't a missing person because they actually thought he left.
My grandparents, they went down and talked to the police department, trying to find him, trying to get a search for him. But in 1977, it's not like today. In 1977, they're like, oh, he's an adult. He can do whatever he wants to do. We're not going to go chasing after an adult who doesn't want to be around.
So now we have a timeline. Mr. Green is in the court system in November of 1977. Mr. Green never makes it to his second court date. So what occurred between late November of 1977 and December 1977 that caused Mr. Green's remains to end up in Walland?
We are actually following up at this time with the people that he was associated with.
One of the things they were real interested in is he had a book with names of his friends and phone numbers.
He had basically had a girlfriend. He had several associates that he was hanging around with, and we are in the process and have spoken to several of them at this point. What information do they know? What stories can they tell us that will continue us down the path of potentially solving this case?
Law enforcement asked me to start trying to remember stuff that I could tell them. And I remember he had a good friend that was down the road from our house that my grandmother would talk to a lot about maybe where he'd went, had he heard from him, or anybody he knows friends-wise, because they had friends in their loop. Foul play was in my grandmother's mind. Again, she wouldn't let it rest that he just walked down the road and disappeared. Instead, she theoried that something possibly else happened to him, determining that something must have happened in his inner circle because he'd gotten in trouble with a certain crowd. So she said, well, whoever these people are he's running around with must be involved somehow. I think something probably very, very malicious probably happened because of the location where he was found and what little remains remained. It was an area of a lot of wildlife, so obviously that helped contribute to this. But It was an unusual place to be, in a very isolated area in the foot of a mountain. It was just a strange place to find his body. So yeah, my mind immediately goes, something else must have happened.
Our goal is to find the truth and the facts in the case to determine whether or not there is criminal action involved based off of evidence that we're provided and items that we learn.
Once law enforcement has potentially developed a theory of the case, and if they think that theory potentially exposes someone to criminal culpability, that's when they're going to bring me in. I have a lot of experience in the courtroom, and what they're going to do is say, General, here's what we think we have. What sort of evidence might be helpful to assist you in making the decision of whether this is a case that we can bring forward for prosecution? So I'll have that discussion with them. I'll rely on their expertise in investigations and evidence collection. It's an all hands on deck approach. We all have our different expertise that we have developed over years and decades of experience.
Because of it being an open investigation, unfortunately, I can't share a whole lot about the investigative efforts going on. What I can share is we want to just build a picture of the last remaining month, days, and weeks that led up to his disappearance. We're trying to figure out who he had been in contact with, trying to figure out his last movements, of course, and we're starting to be able to build that picture. I think it's really cool through this initiative and the technology advances that we've had, we're able to put names to faces that have been lost in time.
Now we're up to 10 individuals who have been identified. It's amazing. We literally went from having no one identified of all these cases to one right after the other because of this new technology. It's a place that I never thought that we would be. But now I'm very optimistic about the other cases we have.
I know DNA nowadays is more important than ever when it comes to any kind of connections of people. So it's a very powerful science.
For the advances in DNA testing, we wouldn't have a victim, we wouldn't have a story. So that was the critical break in the case that allowed us to go from step 1 to step 10.
The technology to do that is here. It's robust, it's predictable. The detective that's worked this case for decades and decades now have answers that can lead them to the truth. That can help give family an answer, family that's been waiting for that answer for decades.
Well, I told law enforcement that they had already done a tremendous thing. I mean, just wanting to have closure, especially for my grandmother, because at her later years she was afraid she was going to die without ever knowing what happened. Even if what happened isn't totally solved, we do have some closure, and that's worth a lot.
My father was my best friend, and I hate to think about what he went through, how he ended up in the middle of that mountain. Somebody had to put him there.
I definitely have some work cut out for me going forward, and I think this investigation really is just starting to take off.
I really believe with the Green case, this comes down to the final moments of his life and who he was around and what he was involved in. And I believe there are people in East Tennessee that know the answers to that.